Hi everybody. In this mini lecture video, we are going to be going into one of what I think is one of the more influential schools of literary criticism, simply because it really kind of spawned a number of other subfields afterwards. Feminist literary criticism. So let's dive right on in. Just as kind of a general overview of what feminist literary criticism really kind of focuses on is it's concerned with the ways in which literature and other cultural products, film, television, video games, I mean, you name it, the news media, whatever. How literature and these other cultural products work to oppress women economically, socially, politically, psychologically. And what I've taken here is from Lois Tyson's Critical Theory Today, user-friendly guide, the second edition. I think this is a list of 6 things that, no matter which brand of feminist criticism you're looking at, it all really kind of hits on or takes these 6 things for granted. These are sort of the 6, I don't know, major unifying ideas or tenets of feminist criticism. The first one is that women are oppressed by patriarchy economically, politically, socially, psychologically, and that patriarchal ideology is the primary means by which women are oppressed. So this understanding, it's this idea that men are superior, and this is the primary means by which that oppression is enforced. The second tenet is that in every domain where patriarchy reigns, so everywhere where there's this male-dominated society, woman is other. Woman is pushed aside and marginalized, defined only by the fact that she is different from male norms and values. So everywhere that is dominated by a patriarchal society, woman is marginalized, is set aside, identifying, again, only the things that are different. And this is the third bit, all of Western, so Anglo-European, the UK, the US, Canada, these kinds of countries, all of these civilizations are deeply rooted in this patriarchal ideology. So, for example, really building on the fact that, like, in the Bible, the portrayal of Eve is that she's the origin of sin and death in the world, the woman. So this is, again, this just to kind of show how deep this patriarchy goes. The fourth major tenet is that while biology determines our sex, male or female, culture, society determines our gender. And so our gender of men and women, it's a sliding scale of a spectrum of masculine and feminine traits. It's not, one thing or the other. We'll talk more in later other videos about how, gender is very much a social construct. The fifth major tenet here is that all feminist activity, including feminist theory and literary criticism, has as its ultimate goal to change the world by promoting gender equality. And that's all really, that's in a lot of ways, is all feminism really is kind of driving for. But it's this idea that feminist theory, feminist literary criticism is just promoting equality. And then the sixth major tenet here, and the last one here, is that gender issues tend to play a role in every human aspect of production and experience. So writing literature, making movies, making teaching, basically doing anything. Anything that we make, anything that we experience, anything that we do, gender plays a role, whether we are consciously aware of those issues or if we're not, it's there. And a lot of I think feminist criticism is aimed at kind of uncovering those instances where maybe we're not aware of how gender is playing a role and kind of shining a light on those things. So you may actually be familiar with this already. There are what we generally consider 3 waves of feminism. The first wave started in the late 1700s and continued into the early 1900s, where writers, were highlighting the inequalities between the sexes. And then the sort of that first wave of feminism really kind of culminated in the early 1900s with the women's suffrage movement, where women in the United States of America won the right to vote. The second wave of feminism started in the late 1960s and continued, the early 1960s and continued into the late 1970s. This was building upon the more equal and equitable working conditions that got established during World War II. And this is where a lot of the focus on sort of sexual and social oppression really gets a light shined on them. The economic limitations that women had heretofore, experienced, the fact that while, the men folk were all fighting in World War II, the women were at home working and earning a living. This really showed that for the last, hundreds of years, women had been prevented from doing that. And so this second wave really kind of served to highlight that level of inequality. And it also established a sort of groundwork for disseminating and spreading feminist theory and feminist thought. There were publications and magazines and stories and, you name it. And it really, it dovetailed and it connected a lot with the civil rights movement. And a lot of that sort of dissemination followed similar tracks. And then finally, ending with the third wave, which began in the early 1990s and is in a lot of ways continuing into, the present, what we're thinking about now. This borrows heavily and builds upon the second wave of feminism, but it borrows heavily from contemporary race and gender theory to resist essentializing the experiences of women or the experiences of anybody, and really to sort of expand on the experiences of marginalized populations. So this is where we get what we call intersectionality theory. This idea that we our identities are made up of the intersection of our various identities. So, for instance, a black woman is going to experience the world not only as a black person, not only as a woman, but as a black woman. The same thing can be, any number of ways in which, our various identities, again, intersect, the way that, where they meet each other. This is really, I think, where the third wave of feminism is focusing. So, what are some key questions that feminist theory asks us? Well, how is the relationship between men and women portrayed? How do we see the relationship between men and women? What are the power relationships between men and women, or characters that are assuming male or female roles? How are these roles defined? And then what constitutes masculinity and femininity? And how do characters embody these traits of masculinity or femininity? Do characters take on traits from opposing genders, and how so? And how does this change others' reactions to them? What does the work reveal about the operations? So again, economic, political, social, psychological. How does the patriarchy work, and how does the patriarchy function to oppress women? What does that work, or what does the text, the literary work, imply about the possibilities of sisterhood, about joining together as a mode of resisting that patriarchy? What does the work have to say about women's creativity? What does the history of the work's reception by the public and by critics tell us about how the operation of patriarchy? So I think a really great example of this is the work of a writer named Kate Chopin. And she was writing in the late 1800s, and her work really kind of went unnoticed and unpublished until it was discovered in the 1960s and published again. And it had a lot to do, I think, with the fact that she was writing from a very explicitly female perspective of very, very strongly resisting, traditional male-dominated modes. And then lastly, what role does the work play in terms of women's literary history and literary tradition? So how significant as far as, women's writing and women's literature does the work play. Again, to go back to the example, Chopin's The Novel, The Awakening is like monumental. It's huge. It's massively important. So just to kind of wrap up, I said feminist theory really, I think it offshoots to a number of different other and really influenced a number of really other theories, which we'll discuss in later videos. But yeah, as you can see, it's asking a lot of different questions, all centering around the idea of resisting the sort of socially constructed patriarchal modes. So that is all for this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Thanks, everybody.